from the historic campus of Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan, where the good, the true, and the beautiful are taught, nurtured, and honored. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, bringing the activity and education of the college to listeners across the country.
A woman is a female, which means that she is a life giver of the body, soul, and spirit. We are to be a voice for the vulnerable, and we are the guardian, the spiritual guardian of the home and of the family.
This is your host, Scot Bertram. Welcome to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. That was Jennifer Strickland. She's the founder of You Are More, a former model, and the author of the new book, I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name. We'll talk in depth with Jennifer about that book later on in today's program. First, we're joined by Dr. Jonathan Gregg. He is Assistant Professor of Education here at Hillsdale College. Dr. Gregg, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Talking about a recent essay published at Real Clear Education, something you co-wrote with Sarah Bess Kennedy, who is a graduate of the Masters of Classical Education program here at Hillsdale College. We begin by discussing about how does someone become a teacher? It varies from location to location, state to state, but how does someone become a teacher? How do we certify that someone is a teacher?
It's a great question. Especially, it's an even more important question recently with the nationwide teacher shortage that we have. A recent USA Today piece said that 86% of public schools are experiencing a teacher shortage right now. And so there's need, in my opinion, for some new pathways into education. Since the late 1800s, it's been, I would say, a pretty heavily gate-kept profession where teacher certification, which you get from most of the time, or usually a 4-year degree at an education school somewhere in the country, is the only real pathway into the classroom. And so it's been the case that if you want to be a teacher, you've got to go get certified. Mm-hmm. And it's starting to move. There's starting to be some alternative pathways into certification, which I think is excellent. But I think there's, when we think broadly, the vast majority of teachers do go to an ed school and do go this traditional pathway into education that you get certified and then you enter the profession. But we are seeing both declining enrollments in those programs, as well as just general teacher attrition across the profession. Something like between 30 and 46% of new teachers leave the profession entirely within their first 5 years, and between 8 and 14% of all teachers leave the profession in any given year. And so what we have is this high turnover, high need profession, and yet we still have it pretty heavily gate kept within this bar of teacher certification.
Is there a correlation between the high turnover, the shortage in many places, and the fact that there is this certification that's expected before you get into the classroom?
I would imagine so. It's not a particularly easy profession to career change into, where a lot of times you can get into the classroom, but you have to go back to school, or you have to find some way to get this alternative certification, which I can talk about in a minute. But it's often an arduous process. It's often something that takes both time and money, which is something that a lot of people who are thinking about becoming a teacher know that they're not going to have a lot of, where it's not like, getting an MBA where you're going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. But it's something that is a high investment. And so I imagine there's a number of people who would think about, hey, I want to become a teacher. And then they look at what it's going to take to do so and immediately just say, oh, that's impossible for me.
Yeah. So who are we missing out on in this process by requiring the kind of certification that we do at this point?
I think we're missing out on a ton of candidates who would be excellent teachers, just based on the process that we've outlined for them, where you miss out on, for example, a mom who's taught Sunday school for 30 years and is excellent with kids, is excellent in the classroom, and is barred from entry. We miss out on the guy who maybe has a PhD in mathematics, who's looking to jump into the classroom and can't because he's somehow not certified to teach mathematics. Where there's a number of people who I think would make for excellent teachers, have the qualities that we'd look for in a teacher, and also just some people who have the desire to learn. Where if you have a passion for the classroom and are coachable and go into a school with a school leader who can teach you how to become a teacher, I think that would be another person another subset of people who I think are barred from entering the profession, or we've made it so convoluted or so difficult that it's not possible for them.
Talking with Jonathan Gregg, assistant professor of education here at Hillsdale College. If you consider the millions, I would imagine that number is, small business owners across the United States, when you start something from scratch and build, you're training every other person in that business, which means you have that gift to train and teach.
That's right. And I think we have we do have some school leaders who I think view this as kind of a small business that they're starting a school. And so when they're expecting to hire these people with some energy, with some excitement, with some passion, with some knowledge, and to teach them, but oftentimes they can't because their pool of applicants is artificially shrunk by some of the policies that we have. This is a bit of a side story, but I was talking to a student at Michigan State, and she was a junior, and she had recently thought about becoming a teacher, and she was actually in a teacher preparation course, but she said, I can't switch now because even though she was still in school, because the major requirement is so large that she would have had to stay in school for an extra couple of years, and she didn't have the money to do that. So even someone who realizes while they're still in college that they want to be a teacher sometimes has to either go an alternative route or is just barred from trying to fulfill that dream.
Is there any data research that would tell us, it's worth it because when you go through the certification, we know you're going to end up a better teacher?
There's a lot of conflicting data and studies in this. There's been a lot of people who have tried to do it. Most studies agree that it's alternative pathways into teaching, or these teachers that are either alternatively certified or alternatively prepared, make just as good of teachers as teachers who go through the certification under kind of controlling for some other factors. There's some disagreement in the research there, and we can point to studies kind of on both sides of the fence. But I think there's certainly an argument to be made that some of these alternative pathways are worthy of exploring. And I think we can do a good job preparing teachers without having them jump through years and years of hoops to get in the classroom.
So what does it look like? An alternative certification process, a pathway for perhaps people who are in a second career or a third career who say, I want to teach, I want to help children and also help alleviate the shortage across the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there's any magic solution there, but I think that the first thing is to empower the school leaders that we have to make some choices about hiring, that they know who they're hiring, and they're looking for some qualities that they think are going to be really good in their particular school. So mission fit, even just familiarity with the culture of the school is a huge factor in determining whether a teacher is going to be successful. But particular content knowledge, these types of things that are a school leader in a job interview can assess those things in a real basis, where if you're painting with such a broad brush that's like certification or not certification, you're never going to be able to start to get at those qualities because you just have a one size fits all type of metric that's going to either allow or bar a teacher from coming in. So I think empowering some school leaders to recognize strengths and weaknesses and saying, okay, well, I'm going to hire this teacher. They don't have as much experience, so I'm going to maybe need to help them learn how to lesson plan, help them learn how to write assessments, et cetera, et cetera. But they have some knowledge, they have some passion. And so I think they would make for a good teacher. And so kind of empowering these local communities, empowering these local school leaders to make the decisions for their schools without having to worry about, do I have to have this percentage of my teachers certified? And I think that would be one big step. I think another thing is trying to look for some of these alternative pathways that would be shorter for teachers and also concurrent with their with them being able to jump into the classroom. I think one of the best ways to learn how to teach is just to jump in and start to do it. Now, we don't want to just throw teachers into the fire. And so things like mentorship and support that we see in some alternative programs, are really, really helpful. But for a teacher to say, well, I'm going to go back to school for 3 years and then hop into the classroom, that's usually not something they're willing to do. But you might say, okay, well, I'll take a summer course every semester and I'll have a mentor who's going to help me with some of the particularities of teaching, but I can get in the classroom right away. I can start making a difference and I can start making money. I think those types of programs are worthy of exploration.
Is there a strategic shift also needed, perhaps taking the focus away from the barriers or building barriers from entry to a shift toward looking at retention? How do we help those first-year teachers who are going through this process for the first time become second-year teachers, become third-year teachers, and stay in the profession? That's
an excellent point, and I could not agree more. I think there's we're so focused on who can be or who should be in the classroom that we forget to figure out how to support teachers while they're there. And I think there's, if we start even directing some of our research efforts towards not how can we keep these alternatively prepared teachers out of the classroom or who's doing a good job even, but saying, how can I help some of these at-risk teaching populations, which early career teachers are at risk, alternatively prepared teachers are more at risk, and trying to say, what are some structures of support that are going to work? And let's direct our research efforts there. Let's just try some things saying, okay, well, does this mentorship strategy work? Does sort of can we get them some special aid or some special help in the classroom? And just getting creative about this idea of retaining teachers. We know there's been so many studies and more experience is better in the classroom. If anyone who's ever taught knows this. As soon as you teach something once, you immediately want to teach it again, and you want to try it again. And I think there's no doubt that keeping teachers in classrooms, in schools for longer periods of time is one of the best ways to improve classroom effectiveness. And I think that's really where our efforts are. We're missing out on the chance to think creatively and direct our efforts there because we're so focused on these barriers and keeping teachers out who shouldn't be there, which I think is just the wrong attitude to have, especially in the face of a nationwide teacher shortage that without some drastic action isn't going away.
Dr. Jonathan Gregg, final question. I've seen a few programs involving making it easier for veterans to enter the classroom as teachers. Those seem like just the right people we want to do this kind of job. Have we seen success with some of those programs?
I think we have. I think certainly this bringing in a set of experiences that have shaped us as human beings and have given us some strength. We've overcome some difficulties. This is one of the best ways to prepare for being a teacher. We see over and over again that teachers who have, compare someone who's laid their life on the line multiple times versus someone who's fresh out of undergrad. Nothing against those teachers, but you're going to have a different kind of strength when you approach the challenge of the classroom that way. And I think it's no surprise that we see programs like that have some effectiveness, is because, again, it's these intangible qualities that make for good teaching that aren't accessible or aren't going to show up on a certification check, but are going to really play really well in the classroom and have a transforming effect on students.
Dr. Jonathan Gregg, Assistant Professor of Education at Hillsdale College. You can read his recent essay at Real Clear Education. Dr. Gregg, thanks so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Thanks, Scott.
Up next, Jennifer Strickland will talk more about her book, I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. Be sure to find the show on X for updated show content and guest information. We're at Hillsdale Radio. We're joined by Jennifer Strickland. She's the author of the brand new book, I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name. Also the founder of You Are More and the host of the I Am Woman podcast. You can find more at youaremore.org. The letters U and R and more.org. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Looking forward to talking about the new book, I Am Woman. This is a question I imagine you get in virtually every interview you do, but you mentioned a number of times in the book, the movie, What is a Woman, where we ask that question and get varied answers. And I think it's just as important for us to have a ready definition when that question is posed. So we'll start here. What is a woman? How do you define it?
A woman is a female, which means that she is a life giver of the body, soul, and spirit. Women are also rescuers and helpers and stabilizers for mankind. We are to be a voice for the vulnerable, and we are the guardian, the spiritual guardian of the home and of the family.
The book, I Am Woman, spends a lot of time on words and the origin of words. You are a self-described word nerd, and use the book to return us to the origin of our name that gives us worth, woman. Why is so much time spent? Why do you think it's so important to look at these words, where they come from, and what they really mean?
I think the world is trying to argue that gender is interchangeable, that a man can be a woman if he says he is one, and vice versa. And we know from God's word that that's just not true. I think the what is a woman question has been circulating around the world ever since the Supreme Court Justice nominee wouldn't answer the question, what is a woman? I think the answer comes from the church. The answer comes from the Word of God. The Bible says that whenever you see the rainbow, you're supposed to remember who God is and what He commands. And we are seeing the rainbow everywhere. And I think it's time for the people of God to see that as a sign to remember who God is and what exactly He means when He says, I created you in my image and likeness. I created you male and female.
You say that like fathers teaching their children, womanhood is learned through legacy. And that struck me because we do see often these pictures, these images of fathers teaching their sons. And I don't know if we see as often those images of mothers teaching their daughters. What is passed down through that legacy?
Well, I think it's really an important time for the older woman to take up that Titus II mandate to teach the younger women. Too often the younger women are separated from older women in church, and then the older women do not understand what the younger women are going through. And, that's really been the purpose of my ministry all along, is to train younger women in their identity in Christ, that the older train the younger. These girls need to know that the word female in biblical Hebrew means life giver and guardian protector. She is the protector of the boundaries. And she can be a voice that takes a stand. Right now, these girls don't know what to do about, men and women's locker rooms and sports and prisons. And a lot of that is because the mothers and fathers are modeling this weakness and fear of man and subservience where they're standing around applauding while men win their medals. We have to teach the girls that to be a woman is to be valuable and to protect her boundaries. And that it's not okay for men to come into women's spaces. They don't have to obey the government when the government says that a boy should be allowed in their locker rooms. That is when they need to learn how to stand up and use their voices. But it takes the women modeling those things. It also takes the women, by the way, modeling how to make a chocolate pie and how to make a lasagna and how to make, grandma's banana bread. That is a huge part of womanhood. And that is the legacy that we leave to our daughters. And those things are best taught in the home. Train our young women to protect the spiritual environment of the home, to create a home that has love and peace, and make a good spaghetti too. I do all of that.
Jennifer Strickland is with us. Her book, I Am Woman Taking Back Our Name. Inside the book, you introduce us to woman wisdom and woman folly from the book of Proverbs in the Bible. And those two ideas come back time and again throughout the book. What do we learn from those two examples?
So we have the wise woman and the foolish women of Proverbs. Okay, we have to remember that in the Bible, wisdom is a she, her. Okay, so God uses a woman to personify either wisdom or foolishness. The foolish woman denies God, destroys marriages and families, and exalts sexuality. As she exalts sexuality, she represents like the adulterous woman, the penultimate foolish woman, the woman who exalts sexuality and gets others to follow her lead, leading them to the den of death. So we can see the feminist movement that exalts its sexuality, whether it's pornography, or the pride movement that exalts sexuality as identity, leads people towards death. So we have the abortion culture, we have the hookup culture, we have the LGBTQ culture in which sexuality equates to identity, which leads to death, okay? Or we have the wise women, okay? And both the foolish women and the wise women are beckoning people to follow their lead. The wise woman fears God, honors men, values children, guards the home, and uses her voice to bring life. And we get to choose whether to be one or the other.
Jennifer, you point out that the fact that females are life givers, and you mentioned earlier that's what the word means, but the fact that females are life givers is now met with extreme hostility. What about the culture's approach to and reaction to the idea of females as life givers, the way we talk about pregnancies, the way we talk about babies?
Yeah, girls have been fed a lie, and I really want to wake up this younger generation of young men and women to understand that the feminist movement was a thought reform movement in which women were taught their name doesn't mean life. It's the typical serpent whispering in Eve's ear. Eve's name means life-giving, okay? She's the mother of all living. The mother in Hebrew means the glue of the family. See, there's action inside the word woman. And the action is to bring life, body, soul, and spirit, with her voice, with the way she manages her words, her mouth, her finances, her marriage, her sexuality. We are called to be life givers. And unfortunately, the world has told girls the exact opposite. So we have to call out a lie, and we have to replace it with the truth. The word female means life-giving. And if we started speaking that into young women's lives, I really believe that we would save a lot of babies. The word male also means protector, warrior, protector. Mm-hmm. And if men understood that my name means one who will lay down his life for the human family, I think they would start laying down their lives in front of those abortion clinics and saying, excuse me, this is my child, and I am accountable to God for the human family, my descendants, and I have a voice here. And they do.
Yeah, what is the role of men in this discussion and your effort to help perhaps women take back their name? How do men play a role?
I think that male, the word male, zakar, in biblical Hebrew, it means one who would remember the commands of God and live them out. So again, it's that same word, remember, that when we see that rainbow in the sky, that God remembers us. To be male is to pass down the family name. The lineage of Christ was threaded through the male. That is why his descendant, he should have a voice over the life and death of his descendants. Men have been taught in our culture to sit down and shut up when it comes to women's rights. That's really what happened with the feminist movement. It was a smash the patriarchy type of movement. Well, feminism is self-destructed. They can't even define what the word woman is anymore. But God's word makes it very clear that Jesus, as the original male, number one, God is the father who is to be honored. He is the family counselor. That's in the roots of the word father. He is the one who will even submit to others for the well-being of the family, as we saw Jesus lay down his life for his bride. He is a warrior and a protector, a provider. His calling is to work and to protect. There's so many amazing things about being a man. And women will never thrive by dishonoring men. It won't happen. The only way we will win this war on biblical gender is by honoring both genders side by side. We rule and take dominion.
Jennifer Strickland with us, her book, I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name. A lot of discussion about women needing to find fulfillment outside the home, finding a job, finding a career, getting outside the house, getting away from the kids for a while. Should women be content and feel that it's all right if they find contentment and fulfillment inside the home?
I mean, the man builds the house, a woman fills it with life. She makes it a home. That's what women do. It is a beautiful gift to be a mother and to care for the home. In fact, the Greek words that describe the actions of womanhood actually say that she is to be the master of the home environment. She is the one who sets the tone in the home. There is no question that the most important place that we have our influence is in the home. Look, I'm a working woman. I, contribute to the family income. I have a voice outside of my home. I'm on the radio right now. But the most important thing that I do is what I'm going to do when I get off the radio. I'm going to go back to my home and I'm going to care for my son and I'm going to care for my husband. I'm going to manage the bills. I'm going to make the beds. I'm going to do all of the things that create an environment of love and peace, because the home is where human hearts are formed. The home is the place that we create, really, warriors and life givers, sons and daughters who will make a difference in this world. There's really nothing more valuable that we do than that.
Jennifer, many young females today perhaps are struggling and trying to figure out who they are and trying to figure out their identity. Many of them end up finding that identity in their sexuality or finding their identity in politics or something they do. What will cause them to find their identity rooted in who they are, in being a woman?
Okay, so it's very normal that these girls are finding their identity in sexuality because of the pornification of the culture, right? The pornography industry has taught women that their bodies have no value. Sex is a game. Children are disposable. They can be whipped and belittled and demeaned. The truth is that they are so valuable. They are worth so much more than that. That their sexuality is worth protecting. And the way that we find an identity that's really going to last is honestly by looking into God's eyes, right? When we look at God, He is the Father. I am the beloved daughter. What does that mean in God's language? In Hebrew, that means I am the apple of His eye. He never takes His eye off of me. In fact, if someone hurts me, it's like thrusting God in the pupil, in the eye. So I find my value by what I look like in his eyes. My body is his creation, for example. He is the creator. I am the creation. He is the light of the world. I am the light of the world. He's the Most High. I am his witness. I am his ambassador. I am his representative. I am valuable. I am the beloved daughter of God. Now, when I know that, I don't allow myself to be demeaned by men sexually, right? I don't need to put photos of my body all over the internet because I know that my body is holy and it's really for my husband anyway. So what happens is that your lens changes when you start to see yourself as the Father sees you, and you live out that identity differently. Girls don't just believe a lie, okay? They live it out. So if they believe they're worthless or their body doesn't have any value, they're going to live that way. But if they believe they're valuable, they believe their identity is found in what Jesus did for us on the cross, they believe they are the apple of God's eye, they will treat themselves like it, and they will expect others. They will only allow others to treat themselves the way they deserve to be treated.
Jennifer Strickland is the author of I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name, also the founder of You Are More, and host of the I Am Woman podcast. Find more at youaremore.org. The letters more.org. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Up next, Dr. Jason Peters returns from Hillsdale's English department. We talk more about Wendell Berry, the American novelist, poet, and cultural critic. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Hey, it's Scot Bertram, and I've got a challenge for you today. Become a better educated American citizen. And to help you do just that, we at Hillsdale College have our free online courses available for all who wish to learn. Our challenge? Take just one of our courses. There are so many to choose from. You can discover the beauty of the Bible in the Genesis story, study the writings of C.S. Lewis, or explore the true meaning of America in Constitution 101. We have dozens more to choose from, and all these self-paced free courses feature Hillsdale faculty and scholars, many you've heard on this podcast. So visit hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE, and pick one of the more than 30 free Hillsdale courses. I hope you'll accept my challenge. Pick whichever course you like and become a more educated citizen today. Go to hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. Be sure to check out the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. You can find it at podcast.hillsdale.edu. There you'll be able to explore older episodes of this program, plus all sorts of great Hillsdale College audio, including Imprimis, The Larry Arnn Show, and Hillsdale's online courses podcast. It's at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. We're joined by Dr. Jason Peters, Associate Professor of English at Hillsdale College. Dr. Peters, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Continuing our series of conversations on the American writer, author, farmer, Wendell Berry. We talked previously about his views on technology. We told you a bit about his life and his first, one of his first major works, The Unsettling of America. Talk about his fiction and his poetry in today's conversation. Was it as a poet that Berry first gained real recognition?
Depends on what you mean by recognition, I guess. He was recognized for some early poems that he published in the school literary magazine when he was an undergraduate. So he was writing poetry fairly early on and good enough, at any rate, to be recognized at that level. His early volumes of poetry followed fairly quickly on that, and then his first novel, Nathan Coulter, in 1960. But I think he was probably recognized by the larger culture as a writer of fiction before being recognized as a poet. And I think probably even to this day, this may say something about the reading tastes of most Americans, but people are more likely to pick up his collections of stories or his novels than they are his poems. I think people generally think that poetry is too much work. In his case, I don't think that's true. I mean, there are some things to puzzle over in some of the poetry, but he doesn't write poems that are math problems. He writes poems that speak plainly, and I don't think he's the sort of poet who is trying to put on a show. He's not the kind of poet who is leaving false tracks like a fox in the woods. This isn't to say he's not a sophisticated poet, but he speaks often in the voice of Wendell Berry, not some assumed voice.
Are there, we talked previously about technology, farming, agriculture. Are there frequent themes, though, that appear in his fiction and poetry through the years?
The themes, I think, are pretty consistent across the genres. The natural world, as it's there waiting to be beheld and experienced, is in the poetry and the fiction and the essays. The theme of marriage, the problems of fidelity as they bedevil us both in marriage and land use. But then there's the humor as well, and he's written some very funny stories. He's got some very funny characters who say some very funny things, often in dialect. And there's some funny poems too. I guess I should say this in case I forget to at another point. But people who read only Berry's essays think of him as a really severe, kind of grouchy person. And I suppose he can be as grouchy as the next guy and severe as the next guy, but he's a very funny person. I remember the first time I spent any time with him, this would have been close to 20 years ago, and we were sitting in his living room, and he's got one leg slung over the arm of a chair, and he's slouched back, and we told jokes, and we told funny stories about people we knew in common, and he would think of something, and he'd get up and pull a book off the shelf and read a funny passage. And once I ran into him at a hotel lobby in Louisville, I guess it was, and he walked up to me and without saying hello or shaking my hand, launched into a joke. So he's a much funnier guy than people who've never been around him or who don't read the fiction and the poetry understand.
We haven't even talked about this yet, which is that you are, I don't know if you'd call him a friend, but you've spent time at his farm, you spent time with Wendell Berry. How did you enter his world, and what additional insight do you think that access has given you?
My first introduction to Berry was by copyright infringement.
That's an introduction.
A friend of mine had photocopied the Why I'm Not Going to Buy a Computer essay and the companion essay that followed it. But in the late 1990s, I think we said hello to each other outside the men's room on the University of Iowa campus. He was there to do a reading, and I'd taken some students over there when I was teaching at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. And then we met in 2004, and we sat around, talked, and then we went down and did some chores. He showed me around the farm. In 2000, and I think it was 2007, my collection of essays, edited collection of essays on Berry came out, and he came to Augustana College to give a reading a year or two after that. So they were guests at our house. I wouldn't overstate the intimacy. I'm not the first person he calls on the phone or the 100th person that he calls on the phone, but he's called me on the phone a couple of times, and we exchange letters, and he signs his letters, I think, to everybody, your friend Wendell. Mm-hmm. And he takes the value of sanctity of friendship very seriously. But we've spent some time together over the last 20 years, and I think his wife likes me, which is always helpful.
That's a plus, yes.
And I like her, and they're very, very hospitable people. But again, I wouldn't overstate the intimacy.
Yeah. We talked previously about these values that are very important to Berry, the agrarian values, marital fidelity, strong communities. How does he write about the process of working out what should be the basis for a principled life?
He puts his characters into, as all good fiction writers do, he puts his characters into dilemmas. If you don't have conflict, you don't have a story. Some writers like to put their characters into impossible situations, and that makes it easier for them to write the story. But he has take the novel Jayber Crow, for example. This is a novel written in the first person, and Jayber makes all kinds of bad choices growing up until he finally understands what it means to make a good choice, what it means to make a right choice. There are characters who are better at that than others, and there are characters who just aren't going to make good choices, never are. And I think he's really pretty good at letting his characters go, letting them free to choose and to do well or to mess things up. And often it's the ones who mess things up that are the most interesting ones. I think most people would agree that his most interesting character is a guy named Burley Coulter, who was kind of freewheeling. I suspect he, in many ways, resembles Wendell's Uncle Wendell, who was murdered when Berry was young. But Burley Coulter says, listen, the people in Port William belong to what's called the membership. It's really a very cool thing, very interesting thing. But Burley's line is, there's only two kind of people. Those who know they're part of the membership and those that don't, but everybody is, whether you know it or not. That's what community is. That's what family is. You're in it whether you like it or not.
Talking with Dr. Jason Peters about Wendell Berry, it's been written about his poetry that his style becomes a voice of its own in those works. Do you find that to be true?
I'm not exactly sure I know what that means. When I read the poems, I hear him speaking them. I hear that voice. I don't think the style is uniform enough for me to be able to make that claim. He has written some formal poetry, and by formal I mean more attentive to syllabic count and rhyme. Mm-hmm. And he's written a fair amount in free verse in that particular style. But I would say that there is a consistency in that voice, except in those poems where he adopts the voice of the mad farmer, for example, which is still him. I mean, it's still Berry talking. But I think if you picked up a poem by Berry and you were asked who wrote this, you would maybe come up with 6 or 7 names that might be good guesses. Mm-hmm. I think his would be one of them. Yeah.
In reading Berry's fiction and poetry, would we necessarily find that a simple life is a better life?
I think you would find. Well, let's talk about the word simple. Berry tells a story about how when he left New York City to come back to his home county in Kentucky, that people said to him, well, you just prefer the simple life. And he said, actually, I left the simple life. In New York, all I had to do was pay for things that I needed, whereas here on the farm, I live by my own work and by my own ingenuity, and I pay for things by my labor more than by swiping plastic as we would now or writing a check. So I think so this is where he comes up with the word complexification. He says, I complexified my life. And he thinks that the complex life is the more rewarding and the more interesting. So I would say that when you read his fiction, you encounter characters who really do love the complexity of living by their own ingenuity, their own talents, their own strength, their own labor, instead of by living according to the specialization of others, which is available for purchase. But I think you certainly will find in his fiction characters who you admire and maybe would like to be like, because of their commitment to know-how and to their willingness to work, their willingness to do the difficult work of sustaining themselves and sustaining the community that they're a part of.
It seems in many places he's telling us very clearly that humans have to figure out how to live in harmony with nature, with the earth. And there's no other choice. Mm-hmm. That has to be a key of how we live our lives.
Nature is our measure. It is our limit. As he points out in the poetry of Edmund Spenser, nature is our mother, but she's also our judge. And as Emerson said, she pardons no mistakes. I think for one thing, he believes that we have simply kicked nature out of the boardroom. She doesn't get a seat at the table anymore. Whereas he believes that nature should always have a seat at the table. We may say, I don't want to be a farmer. I don't want to grow my own food. I don't want to do anything but shop. And the answer to that is nature doesn't care what you think. Mm-hmm. Nature's in charge here. And she may be strategically withdrawing for a while to make us think that she's not there. But even those who talk about getting back to nature are speaking imprecisely. You never left it. You never got out of it. You just put a bunch of middlemen between you and the natural processes that you should know more about and that you should respect more than you do. But our lives are so artificial now. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's astonishing the number of people who don't realize that topsoil can disappear. Mm-hmm. And when it does, it's not going to be fun for people who like to eat.
Right. That's most of us.
Yeah.
Dr. Jason Peters with us talking Wendell Berry. And I wanted to close by asking a couple of questions about one of his works of fiction, Hannah Coulter. One of my students actually said, you've got to ask about Hannah Coulter. So I will. He gives us a commentary in this book, writing from a woman's perspective. Does that seem like a natural outgrowth of his other work?
It doesn't seem to me to be a natural outgrowth, although, and I don't think I would try it. I don't think I would try writing fiction, but I don't think I would assume a woman's voice and try to write a novel. It's a really good book, and what I think happened is he's been writing these stories about the Port William membership, and I think he maybe asked himself an interesting question, like, what would this look like if Tanya, my wife, were telling the story? And so he took the voice that he knows best among women and wrote a novel that she might have, been narrating. And he does a really credible job of it. The book is dedicated to her, and she owns the copyright to it. So this is kind of why I think there's something going on behind the curtain here. A lot of people really love this novel. A lot of people like it best among all his works. I like it a great deal. It's not my favorite novel, but I like it a great deal, and it's got some of the most moving passages in it, I think, in all of his fiction.
In the book, all her kids leave the farm, and so that means there's a real uncertain future. Mm-hmm. We talked in one of our previous conversations about the fissure that can happen and the problems that can occur in these communities when children leave for college and don't come back. Is he warning us, again, think about consequences, that our reliance on sending kids off and having them not come back is going to cause both problems and internal strife in some of these communities?
He's interested in maybe the oldest story, which is the story of departure and return. And it's the story of Odysseus. It's the story of the prodigal son. But in our day, we only tell half the story. We just tell the story of departure. And the novel is, I think, a really very clear warning to us. I don't think he wrote the novel to be a warning. He wrote it to be a story. But it is a clear warning to us of the consequences that will accrue to us if we're only telling half of that story. Mm-hmm. Odysseus comes back. He's offered immortality if he'll just stay with a goddess. And he says, no, I want my bed, and I want my olive grove, and I want my wife and my son and my father and my land and my homeland. Who was it who said you can't go home again? It turns out you can. Mm-hmm. It might be a little different when you get there, but you can. And I had a colleague years ago who I could see him beginning to worry about getting old. And that's because he understood very plainly that he had no one to look after him. Mm-hmm. He had no children to look after him. And in my own marriage, we realized at some point that we were useless to our parents at that point in their lives when they were going to need some help. And so we had to do part 2 of the story. We had to do the return part. And we're so glad that we did. And I think our parents were very glad at the time as well.
Dr. Jason Peters, Associate Professor of English here at Hillsdale College, as we continue talking about Wendell Berry, and we'll do this again in the future. Dr. Peters, thanks so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
You're welcome. Thank you, Scott.
That will wrap up this edition of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Our thanks to Jonathan Gregg from Hillsdale's Education Department, Jennifer Strickland, her new book, I Am a Woman, and Dr. Jason Peters from Hillsdale's English Department. The Radio Free Hillsdale Hour is recorded at the studios of WRFH, the student-run radio station at Hillsdale College. Remember, you can hear new episodes every week on this station. You also can find extended versions of some of our interviews, including Jennifer Strickland this week, or listen anytime to the podcast. Find it at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. Until next week, I'm Scot Bertram, and this has been the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.